learning and, again, self-directed work teams, forgetting a couple of the other things that we got involved with. And then I've run 3-day appreciative inquiry summits, to get teams to vision where their future is and how they're going to be, what their culture's going to be like. And so I've been kind of dancing around team building and team facilitation and all those sorts of things. Probably the most impactful team experience I had was coaching my daughter's softball team when she was 10. That's a whole other story, but really one of my more powerful learning moments. And then about 3 years ago, I was actually doing one-on-one coaching with a client, chief operating officer of a regional utility, and I was coaching the CEO and a couple of their staff members. So they were just kind of dancing a little bit on the edge there in terms of kind of keeping boundaries between the work. But the work was all about how do we get candor. CEO was, I can't get people to speak back to me. They seem intimidated by me. I'm really not that intimidating of a person. Why can't I get them to open up? And I would give perspectives from the other individuals. We want to do that. We're just not sure. We think we're doing that. And so I'm coaching for several months across all of this. And then one day, the president said, hey, he says, when do you have, this was not local, he says, when do you have to leave to go home? And I said, not till this afternoon. He says, you got a staff meeting today. I says, you want to sit in? I'm sure, okay. So I walk into him, of course, he doesn't introduce me. He doesn't even say who I am or why I'm there. He just, there's this guy sitting at the table. So that was a really coaching moment. Or a consulting advisory moment. And they're having this conversation, and they're having this, pretty good, typical, business dialogue. And an issue comes up for discussion. The president says, he gets a couple of perspectives. There's 2 or 3 different perspectives in the room. The president makes a statement on his kind of perspective and asks for some pushback. Nobody says a word. He says, okay, then that's what we're going to go with. And I felt the air just leave the room. And I saw shoulders slump. And, and I saw that he looked at me and he kind of winked, like this is what happens. Yeah. So, and literally all I did is I said, excuse me, I said, what just happened? I said, I'm sitting here listening, and it felt like, and I said literally, it felt like the air just left the room. What happened? And there was like 30 seconds of just awkward silence. They were looking at me, they were looking at him, who is this guy, what's going on? And then finally they started to talk about it. And they had this really kind of moment, where they talked about how we show up in the meeting, what happens when you say this, and here's what I do, and the whole thing. And at the end of the meeting, the president says, that is the best meeting I've had in 3 years. So I thought, there's something going on here. And that's what kind of got me more interested in really kind of figuring out exactly what is team coaching, how can I play more in that space, and how powerful that experience is. Because even when we're doing one-on-one coaching, we're dealing with the client outside of the system that they're in. And what a rich opportunity to work with a client in the system as they're doing the work of the system and not, kind of stepping outside of their work. So for me, that became really intriguing. Good. I'm watching my time. I have a tendency to run over, folks. So,
right here.
You're right there. So okay, so I'm interested when you hear the phrase team coaching. What are some of your perspectives? What would differentiate in your mind team coaching from other things that we do with teams? Just popcorn up a little bit. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are.
I would worry about the vulnerability factor and how much the team trusts one another.
Mm-hmm. So the vulnerability factor is their trust in the room, right? Okay.
Exploring without saying you want in it for me.
Exploring. Say more about that.
Working with a team, most people will consider what my benefit is, all right, relative to the direction that I'm taking, which is what's in it for me. And discerning that to work towards an attitude and a mindset of improvement.
Got it. Thank you.
So I would wonder about the political aspect of it, and sort of along with the trust, the vulnerability. So many people being in the room, being open. Is this a safe spot? What's going to happen if I say this? Especially if the boss is sitting in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Those types of things.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and along those lines, I was just thinking about the power dynamics. Because you're coming into, like you're saying, a system that's in place, a lot of unspoken baggage that they kind of need to explain themselves.
Unspoken, some of not even subconscious.
Right.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, the one thing is clear is there's a lot of stuff going on in the room. And so from a coaching perspective, you know, again, if you think about one-on-one coaching, there's a lot of stuff going on in the room and there's just 2 of you. What happens when there's 11 of you? So in my kind of figuring out and saying, so how do you define what team coaching is when you're going in and talking to a prospective client and try to explain what is this thing and how is it different? So that's one of the things I want to try to address. So this is kind of how I've conceptualized it. I'm kind of just listening to tons of podcasts and trying to read all the books, skim all the books. I'm not good at reading all of them. Is that, for me, I look at it as the big umbrella is team development. All the things that we do are about developing the team. Now, some of it is, some things we do are team building, road courses, let's all go cook chili together. Team launching, getting teams up off the ground. When I worked for Pfizer, we acquired Park Davis, Warner Lambert, have invested in their companies. And my job for 3 years literally was traveling around the country just launching teams, getting Pfizer through Park Davis, getting them together and how they're going to work together. And there's a whole process for that, just to get them up and running. Team facilitation. So maybe you could even call that kind of the process consultation. Go back to the shine stuff. And how do you just facilitate the process of the team? And then team coaching. And I think team coaching, in my mind, is something that is different from the other things. It is not team building, it's not team training, it's something separate. One of the things I wanted to hit here, and so this is an ICF marker too, is whatever it is you're doing, contracting is really critical. So however you do engage with the client and the team, being really clear on what you're being contracted for, what you're contracting with them around. And so being able to understand and explain the differences between team coaching and team building and team launching is really important for that kind of clarity. So this is not mine. This is Laura Hauser, Dr. Laura Hauser's on the West Coast. And of all the things that I looked at, this one seemed to capture as best for me in terms of how I look at it. So I want to kind of just lay out that there's it's good to have a framework when we talk, as you mentioned. There's so many things going on in the room. There's so many things happening. And when you get caught up in that, you get caught up in the swirl of what's happening in the team, sometimes you kind of, where am I, what's going on, you kind of lose yourself. And so for me, it's helpful to have a couple of tools and a couple of ways to kind of come back and start to break down what's happening. And one of those things is what's my role with this team. So one of the big, in listening to and reading the books on people who are saying this is what team coaching is, Peter Hawkins, looking at some of the Gestalt things, there's a woman named Georgina Woodstrup out of the UK that is really well established and does work in team coaching. You've got a perspective from everywhere from, on one end, team coaching is only kind of a very high fidelity process consultation role when you're in the room with the client. You're not teaching, you're not advising, you're not providing them tools on decision-making processes or team charters. You're literally kind of observing and intervening. That's team coaching, and anything else is not team coaching. And there's a part of that that I agree with in terms of when you're in this true coaching mode, that's probably the space that you're in. However, I don't think that you can divorce that from all of the other things that go on in the life cycle. So a couple of the comments were, is the trust there to be able to have some of these kinds of conversations? Well, if you haven't done, if the team doesn't have a good foundation around a clear charter, clear roles and responsibilities, all of those things you do like in a team launch, and they haven't established some norms and built some sort of experience with each other, you're not going to have some of that ability. Georgina actually would argue you could do the whole process from a coaching perspective. I'm interested in listening more to how she does that, because it does sound kind of interesting, but it sounds really hard. So this model here really helped me kind of break it down. So just to orient you, so the center, the vertical axis here is your interaction with the team is a very high directive role. So I'm talking, I'm from the front, I'm providing the information, tools, those sorts of things. The bottom is very low directive, back outside of the system. Okay. On the horizontal axis over here to the right, dialogic means the conversation, the interaction, the dialogue that's happening at more of a social level or relationship level is high, and on the left, it's low. So, if you think about a team launch, getting a team up and running, we're in the upper left-hand quadrant. In that place, I'm the advisor. I'm providing them some tools and resources, and I'm being pretty directive in saying, here's what you need to do, here are the things that need to be established so that you can get off. What is a real team, what's your purpose, what's your mission, what are your metrics, those sorts of things. And so it's not there's not much dialogue either. It's pretty didactic in that sense, and then they're doing a lot of work. There is a point once that's established where you move over to this educator role, which is, in my mind, in my experience, that's where maybe I'm providing some other tools and models on courageous conversations, decision-making matrices, how do you want to make decisions as a team, probably providing at that point some sort of like a team development model so they have a picture of kind of the phases that they'll go through so they can recognize where they're at. So I'm educating and teaching, but here there's a lot more dialogue. From there, then you move into this catalyzer role. And this is, as you'll see, this is where I think the team coaching that I talked about, that Worcester talks about, is where that happens. Okay. My role in terms of them seeing me in front of them as a leader or facilitator is very low. There's a paradox in that. But my role is that, hey, what just happened? The air just left the room. And let the team react. So it's the observe and intervene role. And then there is a role which I think is really critical, which is the sustain, which is how do you exit the system in a way that the system then is self-sustaining. They become peer coaches. That they're able to say, hey, what just happened? And they're not relying on that. How do I build the capability into the system so that they're able to do their own work? So, what I'm going to do for the rest of the morning is really talk more about this catalyzer work. Okay? So I think if you've been working with teams, the stuff around team launches and charters and different models and things like that, team development are probably more familiar with this. But this space of kind of being this catalyst where you're in the background and you're simply observing the being is a little bit more of an amorphous area for us. So, yes. Oh, okay. So it's kind of heart and guts. So what? It's an exercise that I do with teams when I'm trying to get them out of their heads. Is I show them some research on all the different neurons and neuroreceptors that exist in the heart, the guts, and the brain, and how they operate and store memories. and then I draw circles on the floor, and I have them go stand in the circle, their head circle, their heart circle, their head circle, and I think there's a definition of what happens and what those different brains do. So I asked them one question, but I asked them to answer it from 3 different perspectives. And what it does is it gets them to kind of legitimizes the importance of sometimes talking about feelings and emotions, which we need to do. We're going to work on some of the issues that we have to. It gives them a scientific reason. Oh, there really is a brain out there. It's not just a shelf thing with feeling. And you get completely different answers to the same question within 2 minutes. And they kind of like it. It's really interesting. Anyway, so that's why but that's something I do about trying to getting people into that place where I can back down. Okay, so a couple of things, everybody looks for me. I don't know if I'll stick with this or not. I like the phrase high fidelity. What I have found in reading these books is that everybody who's written a book on team coaching is kind of coming up with their own kind of name for do high impact team coaching or whatever. Okay, so I don't know. My trial balloon right now is high fidelity team coaching. The point here is that there's a couple of things that when I just thought about some key points that stuck out to me when I try to define team coaching. One is that one of my guiding assumptions, you heard from a number of places, Boyatzis is one of those, is that lasting change in learning always occurs in relationship. So the change only happens in relationship to something else. So if you're working with teams, you want to work with, obviously, working with the whole team, and you want to work with them in a context in which they are in a relationship with each other. So if you got the whole team in the room, but they're all sitting there looking at me, they're in a relationship with me, but they're not in a relationship with each other. So one of the real advantages of this kind of catalyst role is that you're working with the team as they are in a relationship with each other. Observing and intervening with teams in their natural habitat. And so it's not the team doing some task that I've assigned in a card building exercise or a spaghetti tower or whatever. It's actually the team working on their agenda, solving their real issues. The coaching here also is very much in the moment. It's sharing my data of what's happening, what's my experience in the team. So it's not so much me diagnosing, Wendy, I see you haven't said anything for the last 10 minutes. That's team facilitation. More typically, we all learn that, or draw the people who are not speaking into the conversation. This is more about me sharing my experience of what I'm experiencing as I'm watching and observing what's happening. And then, as I said before, the other important thing is, as in one-on-one coaching, the role here of a team coach is to increase awareness and let the client do the work. Let them have the conversation rather than us saying, well, here's what we need to do, or here's what real candor looks like, and here's how that would sound, and let's role play that. Let's let them work that. And then create capacity for sustainable peer coaching and learning, which was my point before, is all the while you're doing this, the thought is I'm creating capacity within the system to support itself, so that I can leave and not be part of that system. Okay. So this is what sometimes it feels like when you've got a team and a lot's going on. I tried to find the mixed gender one, but I couldn't. Here are 4 things that I have found helpful in knowing when and how to intervene. And that's really, so if you go back to that catalyst role, it's the observe and intervene role that I'm talking about. So what are some things that help me decide when do I do it, how do I do it, what grounds me in my choices as an intervener? One point that actually just I was re-listening to one of the podcasts that I referenced in putting this together. And one of the things that I think is important to note, and really struck me, is if you engage with the client, whatever system it is, whether it's a family system, a small business, a corporation, and their initial experience of you is in that advisor, expert, consultant role, that's how they come to know you. So what happens when you move into the catalyst role? How do you shift that? Because you don't want to be the power in the room in this role, right? And so in some cases, it's almost easier if somebody else does the team launch and everything else, and then the team coach comes in after that. Otherwise, you need to be really intentional about really clarifying how your role is shifting, and be really disciplined on your own interaction behavior with the team, so that, you know, as I find myself with clients where I've done all this, so, you know, say that to them, say that, you know, turn to face each other and have that conversation there. And I try to find places to go and stand and sit, so I'm getting out of visual contact, and I'm sure I'll learn some other great lessons and hopefully wind up with a brilliant idea. The first is, I won't spend a whole lot of time on that, but it really, what I just said relates to that, is self as instrument. Is you are in the system when you're in the room. So you're already affecting what's happening in the room and how people are behaving and interacting. So just attending to your role, paying attention to what that is, and to my last point, you're in the advisor role or the catalyst role. I don't want to spend too much time here. Obviously, being aware of your own filters, biases, reactions. We have all been in some really dysfunctional teams, in some really dysfunctional meetings. And so the likelihood of us experiencing something that seems really familiar and hooks us into, you know, that CEO is doing it again, you know, and then we want to intervene to correct the CEO because it's something that we're, you know, sense memory that's coming up for us. The other thing, the third is really being able to hold on to self in the place of all these complex dynamics. Is really stay grounded with who you are, what you are, you know, get your feet on the ground, and not get caught, you know, maintain that sense of observer role and not get sucked into the system. And it's, again, in one-on-one coaching, we've learned that's hard. You know, we jump into the story with the client, you know, we collude, conflude, all those things, and it's hard enough. You get, again, you're ratcheting up the level of complexity here. And how do you hold the space for multiple runners? And there's more than just multiple, doesn't mean just the 8 people in the room. I'll talk about levels of system in a minute. But again, your complexity is going up. Holding the space for one client sitting in front of you who's feeling some pretty strong things. What happens when you've got 9? How do you hold the space for that? So doing some work around that's really important. I think all of us should have a team development model that we like, we're comfortable with, we work with. This is one that I put together, and it's kind of a, keep stealing words from Julianne, so this is a schmurgling together. Carter's Cube and Tuckman and a bunch of stuff. One of the things I think is important is to look at, to have a developed model or some framework for how you look in terms of the team's needs and wants, not in terms of its behavior. Because I think so, the storming, norming, performing model, it's helpful in the sense that you're identifying where they are by their behavior, but what it really doesn't lay out to you until you get really deep into some of the stuff is, why is that happening? What's the need? What's going on in the room? So, you know, I have found this to be helpful for me in understanding, you know, there's usually, you know, a set of questions that the team is asking itself at some level. Individuals are asking early on, why am I here? Why do I exist? Why does the team exist? And as you move from kind of startup phase to kind of, okay, we're operating, to ultimately high performing, you know, there's the things that share. So you see some of the language here about, you know, predictive trust versus, I did still some line stuff too. Predictive stuff versus vulnerability-based trust, and what does that look like? Where your processes are not only flexible and adaptive, but they become intuitive, they become subconscious. A couple of problems with this model. One is that the presumption is that you're ultimately always driving towards high performance. And I was just reading something that reminded me that that's kind of where coaching started. early on, was that everything was about how I optimize performance, and now we've learned there's a lot of different kinds of coaching. It isn't all about just optimizing performance. So I think we should question sometimes when we're contracting and we get into work is the objective to get this team to become, quote, by definition, a textbook high-performing team, or is there some other objective that you're really working towards? So just question that assumption. The second is, what's the second? Really good too. I'm trying to think where it was. We'll come back to it. Okay, so here's where we're going to get to do a little illustration. So that's the first thing is really being clear on your own sense of self and presence in the group. That's important, so you can hold on to yourself when everything's going on. The second is having some sort of a model that helps you diagnose about what's going on in the room and where are we and what's the need of the group at this point in time. So if they're early stages, you don't want to work. Oh, I know what the second one is. Most teams aren't together long enough anymore to become high performers. There's so much churn and turnover often and coming together and going apart that I think I get teams that they're on a 6-month project and they want to be high performing. And the reality is that's not going to happen in 6 months. Not in probably in some definition. They can become a very good, well-performing team with some good trust and good candor. But if you're taking some definition of a truly high-performing team, diversity we talked about or something like that, it's not going to happen in 6 months. This is probably, for me, the most important and interesting part and challenging part of doing this work, is the levels of system. So before we go into this, we're actually going to do a little exercise. So I think Ann said I'm getting really warm up here. But I'm going to take my so anyway, what I'd like you to do is just individually right now write in one sentence, one brief 50 sentence that expresses why you're interested in team coaching and what you want to take out of here. So there's two things that you have to fit into a 50 sentence. Why are you interested in team coaching? What do you want to walk away from? And then once you've written that sentence, just draw a little line or doodle that represents for you what you just wrote. Draw a little line or a doodle that represents what you just wrote. So with your partner, you're probably already doing this. This is an emerging team experience. With your partner, share your sentence with each other, and then reflect on why is this topic important to the two of us. And then add to your doodle. Take the doodle that you're in and add to it more doodle that represents what came out of that conversation. Much more true to life. What I want you to do is, so the pairs that were together, and I want you to get the next pair next to you, and if it's, if it makes 4 or 5, that's fine, but collectively together. And again, let's be kind of short in terms of what's the sentence that we started off with. Have everybody go around and share their sense of what they're looking for, then engage in some discussion about, so what does this mean for us as a group now of 4 or 5? Have that conversation and then add again to your doodle. And what captures the essence of that conversation? So Now take a look at your doodle, and just take a minute and really pay attention to it and note the evolution of your doodle. Where did it start, and where did it move to as you went from thinking about it for your own needs and objectives to prepare to a larger group? Take a second, look at that, pay attention to it, note the evolution of it, think about what that represents to you. The question or the statement was, take a look at your doodle and pay attention to the evolution of it, from where you started to where it was in this last session. And then I'm going to come back and ask you questions. Okay. Well, let me start there now. So anybody have just a general reaction? What do you notice as you look at the evolution of your doodle? Anybody have a particular just reaction, observation of, as you look at that for yourself, what do you notice?
Became more complex and larger.
How do you feel about that? Thinking back to where you started.
There's not a simple answer. Because it is complex. You are trying to so the further you go out, the more you understand the complexities that are involved as a coach, get a picture.
And does your original doodle, is there a place for that in that larger system?
Oh, yeah.
Is it still in there?
Okay. Yeah, it's getting captured.
One of my observations was I was looking at a concept that had a doodle. As we talked, there's another layer, and it was already there, but it wasn't looking at it. And then another layer that was there that it wasn't looking at. So it was a broad.
Okay.
So mine was a tree, and as we emerged, and I heard about all the teams, my colleagues were like the apples. And then we said, we want tools and compass and structure. So I made a garden code and fertilizer. And then I became aware we can work tools with the clients. I don't really need tools. They didn't believe that I wrote a tree. So when we were talking, I had the same experience as we were, first partners and then before, where everything got more complicated and bigger. But I felt compelled. The only way I could even manage all of that was to simplify it in a way that kind of created overarching themes. Because once we got to this many things, my doodle got really complicated. And so I was like, all right, well, what are the key elements to focus on that don't forget anything, but represent everything?
Were you that ultimate combined vision? Were you as attached to that as you were your original doodle, or did you feel like
I was maybe, it felt less personal, but it actually was more exciting.
oh, okay. Other observations?
Someone over there had mentioned layers. We talked a little bit, when we merged, we talked a little bit about layers in regards to race and political orientation and gender, ethnicity, nationality, and how that would impact the sense of belonging within the team as well as conflict or the inability to resolve conflict. And so just thinking through those multiple identities would be really important.
I'll add a comment onto that just from my own experience in the group intervention program at the Gestalt Institute. One of the big learnings for me around kind of either white guilt or white male privilege, is that I didn't notice, when I was in a group and there was a lot of stuff going on, I wasn't initially noticing the racial diversity or the gender diversity in the group because I don't normally have to think about those things when I'm in a group. Whereas people who have experience being part of another group tune into that stuff pretty much more quickly. So that's a piece of work I do. It's still very intentional for me. It's really scanning and understanding what are some of the subgroup dynamics that are going on.
Well, my perspective was really different. First of all, I'm new to the whole concept of coaching, so I was looking at it more as being part of a team, not being on the outside looking in. And my doodle was a puzzle. Started off as a single piece and then just continued to grow from the center out as the team grew. And it's a very simplistic, concept, but yet it can represent a very complex situation depending upon what the team dynamics are. Everybody brings their experiences, their perspectives, and everything to whatever the team is. Everybody has a different role on the team. So that's why I just kind of gravitated to that kind of, and my puzzle just continued to grow as the team grew. The puzzles all fit in together to be a functional unit. So,
Just kind of an organic evolution of that. So what? Right? So what? So the illustration, I think, one of the questions, when I walked up and stood by your group and kind of listened, did you notice anything? Did anything shift, or were you aware that I was there? Yeah.
What do you want?
Are we doing it right? Are we doing it right? Yeah. So, and that's real. I mean, that's the power of, I'm standing up, I'm walking around. How do I show up in this group that I'm not shifting the work, and I can't not completely there. So there is some impact. But how do I watch that? Anybody else notice any kind of like subgroups within your group? Was there like one person who you said, ooh, my idea is a little bit more aligned. They're here for the same reason I am, but a little different from these folks. You notice some of those similarities and differences?
We had an interesting time with the doodle because we had all answered the question verbally differently and from different perspectives, but once we kind of layered them all together, we realized there was a common theme among all the doodles, and like that group over there, we completely abandoned the old one and created something new that captured the theme. So it would be interesting to work with that in the real world.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And is that something that you're still excited about? So, we're kind of socialized to say we need to figure out a way to come together. Are we going to all be together? And how do we do that in a way that everybody still is as committed to the purpose or the goal or the objective as when they walked in? Maybe for some of you, the combined doodle, the eventual doodle, was you didn't see yourself in it, or less of it. What I wanted isn't as present and full and rich as it was when I was just here by myself. Whereas it's like, wow, no, I'm even more excited when I started with this thing, but now there's even more than one. All of those things happen. So the point is, in any team, there are all of these things going on at the same time. There is the intrapersonal. What do I need? What do I want? What's my desire? Am I getting satisfied? How am I going to show up? How do I want to be here? How do I want to participate? How do I want to be seen? All of that stuff is going on within the individual. And they have an idea of why they're there. Okay, so everybody came in here at some level of curiosity or interest in team coaching. My guess is that if we went back and reread all of your statements, even though team coaching is the umbrella, there's quite a diversity of desires, wants, needs, interests that everybody had, and how does a team, allow for that?
Andy,
Yes.
you talked a little bit about your role when you come into these teams to assist.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, and maybe this is part of the content. about, a team leader or the, the boss, where you see them, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah. Well, they are a player in the room, and in many cases, their role, because it's different, has a different impact. So it's the obvious stuff. It's something you track and pay attention to. And I have these conversations with leaders on, am I in the room, am I not in the room? What role do I play when I'm there? And some of that feels kind of manipulative. My bottom line is they're part of the team, they're in the room. They have to be. You can't work with the team if you're not working with the whole team. And you want them to show up the way they show up. So if I create different rules for them and say, okay, I need you to really hang back today. That might be fine if we're working on the launch, on the team launch, and we're trying to work on vision and purpose, because you do want to hear what other people say. But when we get into coaching, everybody needs to be themselves, because you got to see the system in its natural habitat. So there's the intrapersonal stuff. There are things going on between individuals in the team. There are subgroups, whether it's marketing versus sales, line versus staff, male, female. All of those things are at play. There's multiple subgroups. There's just you and I think alike. They're the quiet people. They're the talkative people. These are the confronters. These are the pacifiers. They're the ENFPs. These are the ESTJs. Whatever those things are. The high Ds and the high S's. All that stuff is happening at the same time in the room. And then there's the group as a whole. And then if you listen to Peter Hawkins, he will tell you the absolute most important system you got to pay attention to is the organization outside of the team, because what the team is delivering, performing for some other part of the system. So if you're not paying attention to the interaction of this group or this team with the broader organizational system, then you're kind of missing the whole point of why we're here. I think there's a lot of work you can do at the group and the team level and not immediately jump into the system, but it's something you have to pay attention to. Yeah.
And can you speak to the distinction between groups and teams on that?
Yeah, so actually I meant here, I probably should put team. Group is the team. Yeah. As opposed to just a group of people that come together for a particular.
So Andy, I'm sorry. So when you talk about outside of the team, the organization, are you including the culture? It would seem like it's really hard, because that's what drives. People can have a great culture statement or mission statement on their wall, but you really want to see what the culture of an organization is. You just watch the people, watch the leaders, and sometimes it's very contradictory to what's on the wall.
I think your Agile coaches could probably tell you lots of stories about that. Because Agile has its own kind of a culture: move fast, make decisions quick, be very collaborative, but often they're created in these very hierarchical, top-down decision-making kinds of organizations that want to have all the answers right, now, and not say, well, we think this piece will work. So, Kim, you mentioned that's kind of your world.
Well, I am a Scrum Master, and I'm trying to move into that as a coaching space, and I'm finding that I'm having to fall into this more didactic learning piece instead of the coaching.
Yeah. And that's a big thing. There's a lot of process to that. But how those teams, so if the team says, hey, we're going to create a culture for ourselves, that is in conflict with the broader organizational culture. How do they manage the challenges, stakeholder management, and those sorts of things? The point here is that, again, as a team coach, you've ever heard the term shuttling, between what's happening out here, what's happening in here. Then some of the Gestalt stuff you've heard that way. You're shuttling big time here, and you're choosing and trying to pay attention and track to what's happening at all these different levels of system. There is the concept of equifinality, which says at some point you can kind of start anywhere, and you can eventually get there, but it is, so it doesn't mean that you have to capture everything that's going on. You do need to scan across all the different levels so that you're not missing things that may be really a focus or an issue for the group. And if you're only looking at the team as a whole, if you go in and you're saying, I'm just looking at this group of 8 people and how they interact together as a team, and you're not looking at some of these other things, you may never get to an observation of what may be a fundamental challenge for that group. And it's out of their awareness, it's out of your awareness. But as you said, it wasn't like adding to it, it was just uncovering, it was there. You just needed to kind of broaden the lens to be able to see it. So one of the big questions here is, when you are in the coaching role, which means to observe and then intervene, at what level of system do you intervene? Because your intervention can be at any one of these levels. The organizational may be a little bit of a challenge, and I should talk about how the team manages the external environment. But as a team coach, there are times where your intervention may be at the intrapersonal level. It may be with one individual whose needs are not being met or somehow stuck and it's affecting. It may be with yourself and how you're showing up. I will, so there's a team I've been working with for about a year and a half. This is another kind of an aha moment. I was coaching a couple of people on the leadership team. One from the sales function, one from the product development. And beginning in June of last year, product development group decided they were going to add it to international leadership training organization. They were going to add another leadership program, tiered program. They're going to add a third tier. Sales organization felt that it was too much like another program, and it was going to cannibalize the attendance of one of the other programs. And so these issues were coming up in our conversations, and I was working with them on how they deal with each other, how they communicate and solve issues together. The CEO was saying they're always running to me as opposed to working with each other. So they've been working on this since June. Okay, my meeting now is December. Okay, with this team, and it hasn't been resolved. We've had conversations. The CEO has been brought in. He hasn't made any decisions either. And so we're in the way that I've set up this session was a 2-day meeting, but it was a 2-day business meeting. You know, it was their agenda. They had business topics to work through, and I was in the true kind of coach role. And I just, I said, let's make sure that this question is on the agenda. It was, and they got to it. And again, there was this little dance they did around it, and then they were gonna. There was like no decision, and that's kind of when I intervened, and actually ended up doing kind of a visual where I got the product development manager and the sales manager sitting across from each other to have their conversation with the rest of the team around, and with the idea that. And ask them, what's the outcome you needed if we have to make a decision as we go with this program. And so there was about an hour of conversation. Now, the group had the ability to have that kind of a thing. I would not have done that with them 9 months earlier. They wouldn't have been able to have that conversation. But they were at a stage in that development model where I felt like, okay, he was pushing the edge a little bit. They had never done this before. But one of the big issues was how do we have a candid conversation? How do we really have a good Donnybrook that has some respect? But we really, and there was some raised voices. I ended up doing a little teach back on courageous conversations. And giving them a couple of tools, so I did shift into that, educator, role a little bit, but then step back out and then put them in the front of the room. So those are the kinds of choices that we get, confronted with. And it really is a judgment call. There's, other than to pay attention to, again, that's why I go back to those tools. How are you showing up? What's my ability to hold the space? Where is this team in its life cycle, its evolution, its ability to do certain things? And what's happening at different levels of system? And if you have kind of those frameworks to hold, you can make some pretty good educated guesses. We're all going to make decisions that we're, oh crap, that wasn't the right one. That's going to happen, and we learn from that. But those are some of the things to pay attention to. So I'm going to, I referenced the group intervention program at the Gestalt Institute. So I'm stealing one thing from that. They have an acronym called PELOSI. Okay? And when you're as a team coach, the process that I use is, okay, what's the focus, what's the issue, what's the figure? So what is the central issue that's at play here? What's my intent in an intervention? What is it that I am intending by doing this as a coach? So is my intent to build the team's experience with having conflict safely? Okay. Is it more performance focused? Is it my intent is that I want them to be able to come to a decision? Whatever it is, be clear on what your intent is. What's the level of system that I'm working in? And then I actually do the intervention. Rather than just kind of reacting to something that's happening in the moment.
What do you mean by level of system?
So am I going to intervene with the team as a whole? So is my question or intervention going to be directed to the full team? You know, say 10 people, it's all 10 people. Is it with maybe just 2 people? Like I did in that situation where I had the product manager and the sales manager really have this conversation, because that's really where the decision had to be made. It could be between 2 groups. It could be, you know, setting up, you know, intervening in a way that has the staff people talk to the line people about some of their issues and frame it in that way. That's so. The focus is what is that issue. So what is the topic? What's the conflict? What's the stuck place? You can show me what's the figure. Okay.
Yeah, well, if it's coaching, that's not yours to determine. So have you had previous conversation with the team for them to identify what it is they want to work on or where they want to get better?
So I've done, I guess, 3 talks. One is I've done that going in and have some sense of what's the particular issue he wants to wrestle with.
Right. So this isn't you determining.
It's them determining. Otherwise, it's me observing and then testing. So saying, I'm hearing this, and then asking, is this something that's going on? Is this something you want to work on? You know, and then so I'm kind of stepping in and then stepping out. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But again, it's not me saying, okay, guys, we're going to stop here and work on that. It is needing to kind of verify or validate that it's a figure. Their figure, not mine. Right. Yeah.
A good question that I have is if you're contracting or team coaching,
Yeah.
you know, if you are, you mentioned, you know, having clear deliverables. What are the clear deliverables that you think you can deliver on in a given time period?
Yeah.
You know, working with a smaller team, so let's just say a team of 10, obviously if it's a big team, it's crazy, but.
Yeah. Well, and so the answer, I guess for me, it would vary based on where you're starting.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's a brand new team that hasn't, and you need to do the team launch and chartering piece, you know, then that 6 months maybe you're just getting them up to some beginning norms and some early kind of safe conflict sorts of things. If it's a team that's been around for a while and you pass that, then it's, yeah. And it also has to do with how frequently you're able to work with the team. If it's in that 6 months, it's only twice over the 6 months with a day and a half like off-site business meeting, or are you sitting in on every week or every month at their staff meeting? That makes a difference too. I think the other question I'm hearing is also bringing up the contracting piece too, which is what are you contracting with the organization to do, and how do you explain the value that team coaching can bring. A team launch or an offsite team building session, they're pretty familiar with those things. So if you kind of say that, there's a frame of reference. But for a lot of organizations, when you say team coaching, they're kind of, so what is that? How is that different?
Or some people think that that's what they want. They
Or
think
that's-
that's going to be the solution to an issue, to solve a team dynamic problem, but it may not necessarily be the solution to the issue.
And I think that's where we are as team coaches, is there's still a fair amount of educating of the client in terms of what it is and what it can do. And I'm, frankly, I'm still having my challenges with, or I'm not totally comfortable with how I explain it with clients. I mean, it's constantly evolving. Preparing for this actually was, part of it was intentional, was to help me figure out how do I formulate and explain what this is. So it's an educational experience for me. So, question, I don't know if you can see this, but from an ICF competency, so for guests, we have ICF competencies, which is really the core to the work we do. It provides kind of a foundation, a framework for the way in which we engage with clients, and we maintain kind of the quality, the ethical value, the integrity of our process as coaches. I'm curious, as you're thinking about this, which of the which competencies really jump out as being particularly important in team coaching? Presence. Yeah, coaching presence. Being able to be there, present with what's happening in the room at all these different level of systems is valuable. Others?
Creating awareness.
Yeah. Creating awareness with the team and powerful questioning in order to kind of ask those short questions and get out. And if you look at all of them so far, right? I think presence is probably the most important, just because of the complexity of what it is that you're doing. But all of them apply. And I would imagine at some point there's going to be a committee at ICF which is going to say, so how do we kind of write a version of these that apply to team coaching? Because there are some things.
It's already in the works.
Already in the works. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think there's some other, there's probably something to be added to this as well. Yeah. Particularly around the level of the system. Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to try to do these. It's in the handout. I tried to think of with different types of interventions. You can do it at the individual level, the pair level. In some cases, you do interventions on process because the client has said we've got to get to a decision. So help your coaching role, I want us to kind of just keep us moving and keep us focused. So that feels a little bit more like process consultation. But again, when they get stuck, you can kind of step out and bring it to their awareness. And it's almost like a stop action with them. And you can talk about process interventions. I'm not going to have time to talk about this. I think just give me a couple minutes. Doing a team diagnostic, I think, is potentially important. And I say potentially important because I wouldn't just make it a blanket. Every time I go with the team, I'm going to run them through this team assessment. Just like you wouldn't necessarily do a 360 every time you work with a coaching plan. But it is helpful to have some sort of a diagnostic process to where you know where the system is, so you know where to start. And it's not just self-report. So it may be interviewing individual members of the team and just asking about the process and maybe actually observe it initially. I love to do that. It's just say, can I just sit and observe the first couple of meetings and not say anything, so I can get a sense of where this team is. And there are some instruments and more coming out in some diagnostics on teams. So there's stuff that's been around for a while. There's the Belvin Roll piece, there's Myers-Briggs that can be applied. Yeah, I mean, so some of the ones that have been around, but there's one called the Team Diagnostic, and then there's one called the Team Diagnostic Survey. Those are two. Jan, there's another one that you've recently come in contact with.
Pixel Group has another one, also Grove Consulting has another one.
Yeah.
And there's also Marshall Goldsmith's, the Stakeholder Center Coaching has now a new thing, the team piece, so it's a bunch of emerging ones coming out.
Yeah.
Lencioni's,
Yeah, exactly. So the one I like is the one I like to work with is called the Team Diagnostic Survey. It's the Richard Hackman, Ruth Wagman model. They just kind of became commercially available just about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I was one of the pilot users, so I got to be using it for about 4 or 5 years. And basically, I'd say just take a look at their book. It's pretty consistent. Where you're looking at, there's some foundational elements. Is this a real team with a purpose, with the right people? And then do they have a supporting structure around them to enable them to be successful? And the team leadership to make all those things work. And then it'll give you, this is kind of a high-level report. So you get some scores on each of these dimensions, and then it also looks at task processes and team effectiveness. And so you get into norms and behavior and psychological safety get tracked here. And behind each one of these numbers, there are bar charts, so you can further break down. There's multiple cuts. So task performance is actually a combination of 4 things. So it's out there. It's a thing to take a look at. I think so. What's needed? Obviously, there's a lot of research going on and continue. The integration. I think one of the other things that I can see happening is, and I'm starting to do that with clients, is talk about it, integrating both one-on-one coaching and team coaching. That I can actually work with the leader sometimes more effectively if I'm working with them, with the team, as opposed to them coming and telling me how the team meeting went. And I think that has some real potential for how you do that. I think there will be, as people become more educated, they're going to find that this is a much more cost-effective way to reach more people in an organization. So I think the likelihood of more interest in team coaching is if I can help this team become effective and affect 10 people, as opposed to having a series of one-on-one. The evolution of the competencies, we talked about that. And then the survey, there's some surveys that says that there is a lot more growing interest in team coaching. So let me end there and see if there's any questions. How much time do we have for questions? 2 minutes. Any other questions or comments?
Perfect time.
Got it. Okay, we're questioned out. Well, I will turn it back over to our hosts.
All right.
And our closing announcements. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.